It's 10 o'clock, time to get started this morning. And a few weeks back, Oliver texted me and asked me to fill in this morning, and I said I'd be honored. And then about a week and a half after that, Mr. Chad sent me a message and said, would you take Bible class as well? And, oh, by the way, it's on Matthew 24. And I said, Chad, I thought we were friends. Because there's a lot in this chapter, as you all, I'm sure, know. And it's got some difficult passages. There's just a lot of material in there, and there's clearly not enough time, and I hope you all brought the track shoes that Mr. Jack talked about last week. But there's things like the premillennialist idea, this whole Kirk Cameron's famous movie Left Behind comes from these passages where he's taken it. And you know, as I was looking for material, and I wasn't looking at the Left Behind stuff, but somehow I happened across it, and there are 4 of those things now. That poor dude has left behind 4 separate times. You know, you'd think he would have figured that out, how to get on that bus after the second time of being left behind, but whatever. And then you've got ideas of there's a thought called realized eschatology, where people believe that both Matthew 24 and 25 have both already been completely fulfilled. There's no future events in either of those. There's all kinds of ideas about when that shift happens from the things that have already taken place to the things that are future. And some people think that the split is between 24 and 25. Some people think it's earlier. Some people think it's later. And so it's a pretty good chance somebody's toes are going to be stepped on when you talk about this chapter, because I'm sure we don't all have the exact same idea about that. But we'll see what we can do this morning. So let's jump in and read the first bit of text here. So Matthew 24, verse 1 through 4 says, "But Jesus left the temple area and was going on his way when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. But he responded and said to them, 'Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down.' And as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us when these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?' And Jesus answered and said to them, 'See to it that no one misleads you.'" And I want to stop right here at this point, because as I was studying for this, I ran across a commentary that suggested, or that pointed out, and I never noticed it before I read this, I don't know, like all of you, who knows how many times. But in verse 1, there's 2 verbs there for leaving. He says, as Jesus left the temple area and was going on his way. And they suggested that what that was symbolic of was this idea that he is physically leaving the temple for the last time, because he won't be back there again. And 2, he's spiritually leaving the Jewish people. Because most of the time they would just say he left, right? But they put that in there twice. Now, there's no proof of that. It's just somebody's supplication, but I thought it was an interesting idea that I'd just never seen before, that there's these 2 verbs there that, you know, you really don't need. And so when you look at this is the temple map. I'm sure you guys have all seen this before, but they probably would have left from this east gate and gone down through. This is the Kidron Valley here, and then this is the Mount of Olives all along here on this side. And so they would have traveled down through, probably half a mile roughly, depending on where they land on the Mount of Olives there. And as they turn around, and the disciples point this out to him, he says to them, this whole thing's coming down. Look at this. This is a model from it's somewhere near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's at 1/50th scale, this model that's been built of the city of Jerusalem. Even this model looks to me like it would be hard to disassemble and not leave one stone upon another. Can you imagine them turning and looking at this thing and going, how in the world, this massive structure, how in the world is this thing going to be torn down? But they don't even question that it's going to happen. He says to them, the center of your world is going to be destroyed. Where all of your sacrifices happen, where your whole tradition stems from, that's going away. And they don't question that. I mean, wouldn't your first question be, wait a second, what are you talking about? You're going to tear my temple down? To me, that's a pretty strong statement on the deity of Jesus, that these men with him don't even question the fact that this thing's coming down. It seems ridiculous. I mean, in our day and age, we could push a button and that thing's vaporized, right? But back then, that's a really big undertaking. They don't question that, and they just let it ride until they've walked that half a mile, and they're all the way over to the Mount of Olives. And then what they ask him is, when is it going to happen? Not how, when. They just get right on board, knowing the things that they've seen from Jesus up to this point. Like, okay, if Jesus says that building's coming down, that building's coming down. When is it happening? Because we want to know about that. So then if you jump down, it's 5 through 14. This is where he starts to list the things that are not going to happen, right? These are not the signs that this is going to happen. It says in verse 24, verse 5, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and they will mislead many people. And you will be hearing of wars, rumors of wars. See that none of you are alarmed, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Then they will hand you over to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. And at that time, many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will rise up and mislead many people. And because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will become cold. But the one who endures to the end is the one who will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And so you get this list, the wars, the rumors of wars, nation against nation, famines, earthquakes, false prophets, many falling away, lawlessness running amok, right? And these are some of the verses that so many of these ideas of the rapture come from. And it's easy to see why. You just have to get up and watch the news this morning and you be like, Mr. Sean, we got 7 of those things right now. So are you sure? Are you sure we shouldn't be making ready? But again, you gotta keep the context and keep reading and hold on to about verse 24 where it answers a pretty important time question for us, which we may or may not get to this morning. We'll see. Does anybody have, so I'm sure there's ideas or thoughts on some of these verses. Anybody have any questions that they were hoping I might answer this morning? I don't guarantee I will, but we'll see.
It's more of a thought. Understand that they just got through building that temple. It's taken them 40 years to build that temple, and it's just finished. So to me, there's a little significance there in regards to when he says about this idea of tearing it down. also Josephus tells us that they even dug out the foundation. And not only did they tear it down, they dug it clear out.
Right.
So the destruction is pretty significant.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Eric, did you have your hand? Oh, no.
In verse 3, when they're asking, like, tell us when this is going to happen and when you're coming back, do you think that they're still thinking of an earthly kingdom at this point? Or do you think they kind of, like, it's interesting because, like, the New American Standard says the end of the age, but then, like, if you look at the King James Version, it says the end of the world. So I'm just wondering at this point, and it's probably supposition anyway, but, like, would they know that, like, he's going to establish a kingdom not on earth at this point?
I have a hard time envisioning them not thinking it would be physical. I mean, just for me, because they were so trained to look for that, right? They thought that their whole thought was that God had always protected them. God would always take care of them. They would always be, even when they were carried off, they were brought back multiple times. And so I think they, even still at this point, with some of the things Jesus has said, to me, they were still thinking, at least to some degree, yeah, this is physical. When this is torn down, something else is going to be set up, and Jesus will reign. I mean, that's just my take on it. And again, it's supposition, but yeah, that's kind of how I would see that. Anybody else have a hand up that I missed? So when we move into, here we go, here's the big verse that everybody always has a problem with. 24:15 to 19, it says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get things out of his house, and whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those women who are pregnant in those days and who are nursing in those days. Moreover, pray that when you flee, it will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor will it ever again. And if those days had not been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then, if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or he is over here, do not believe him. For false Christs will arise and will provide great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Or behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." So when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy places, so in Hebrew, abomination of desolation means hateful destroyer, which we'll see in a minute is a pretty good description of the things that happen. And so we know that this abomination of desolation comes from Daniel. He tells us that in the verse. And it's from Daniel 11:31, Daniel 12:11, where this exact phrase appears. And then it's also referenced in 9:26 and 27. And Luke sheds some light on this as well, because he says in 21:20, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near." And so we've got Daniel telling us, when we go to Daniel, we'll see that he tells us the first three kingdoms that are listed in that vision. And it's Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks. He doesn't name the fourth, but we all know from history, and it's proven, that the Roman Empire followed that, so we've got to be in the time of the Roman Empire, which they clearly are at this point. Luke tells us that it's an army, and so if Rome is the power, it stands to reason that it's their army that we're talking about. So when you see Rome bearing down on you, it's time to boogie. You better get out. So to me, this poses a kind of a first road bump for the people who would think this is all future. Because I don't know about any of you, but do any of you really think that Italy's going to mount an army and surround Jerusalem again? And even if they did, are the Jewish people going to care? There's a mosque sitting on top of that rock now. So clearly, this part of whatever we're talking about has to have happened. But this is where, for me, this gets really cool. The history that is behind all of this. And maybe you guys have heard this before or gone through this, I don't know, but if you have, this will just be a little bit of a reminder, a refresher. But starting in 66 AD, so the Jews have always been a problem for the Romans, right? They're just different. They don't do things like everybody else. They have this whole one God thing. I mean, what's that about, right?
They're troublemakers.
Absolutely. They've been troublemakers from the beginning. And so in 66 AD, this guy named Florus was a Roman. He decides that he's going to collect taxes, in his overdue taxes, which to the Jewish mind were taxes they didn't owe and shouldn't pay and all this anyway, right? So they push back. They don't like this, all this burden that has been placed on them. So they force this guy out of the city. They mount an army and they actually push this guy back. And so they send another Roman guy named Gallus to deal with it. And so this guy doesn't have any better luck, right? He comes in and tries to put him down to the revolt, and no luck at all. They push him back even farther, just beyond Jerusalem, even like to regions outside of there. And they're so hard on this guy that as he's retreating, he's having to just pick up and move to get out of there. So he's leaving behind all kinds of ammunition. I mean, I don't know what the armory was at the time, but whatever it was, they were having to leave weapons behind as they flee from this Roman or the Jewish revolt. So not only have they lost ground, not only are they losing the battle, they're supplying the Jews with weapons for when they come back again, right? So this guy leaves. And at this point, Rome, they don't respond right away because the Jews are fighting amongst themselves inside the city too. There's different factions and things, and what are we going to do with the, they don't agree on how to deal with the Romans. And so there's all this infighting, and they're just sitting back going, wow, they're going to destroy themselves. Let's just watch and see what happens. But they're mad, right? So they haven't forgotten. And so they're happy to just let them do this. But then they send Vespasian and his armies. They're like, this guy's going to deal with it because he's a proven military leader. This guy's got some serious battle experience. And so they send this guy in. And in 67 AD, he starts at the north and just works his way towards Jerusalem, cleaning up the problem. And the first battle in 67 AD is actually in Galilee, and it's at this point that he captures Josephus. Because Josephus was the head of the the Jewish forces. And so they take him, and then that's when he's got his front row seat to write all of these wonderful documentaries that we have of that particular time. And so Vespasian comes in and pretty much stamps out the rebellion everywhere except Jerusalem. And in 68 AD, he surrounds the city, just like it said they would. Here's your sign in 68 AD. Rome is here, and they are surrounding you. And so they set up a perimeter, and they just, again, continue to sit and watch because the Jewish people are still fighting, but they also, if they've got them surrounded, they're not letting any supplies in, they've got limited resources, and eventually they're going to starve out, is their plan. And they're smart enough, because there's I didn't put it in my notes, but there's a big festival that happens during this time, and I don't remember which one it was, but the Jews are showing up to be in Jerusalem at the temple for this festival. And they're like, sure, go on in. You can go in all you want. Don't try and come out. And so they just keep letting more and more and more and more people into the city, again, hoping that all of this extra pressure will cause the city to collapse. And they just, keep piling in there, keep piling in there, keep piling in there. And somewhere, sorry, I got off of my notes here. Oh, okay, here we go. So it's not looking good, right? If you're in Jerusalem at this point, this battle-hardened general has you surrounded. And like I said earlier, they're mad. The Jews have been nothing but a thorn to this Roman army that's around them. And now granted, the Romans that were there before weren't a real serious force up to this point. When Vespasian comes, he brought all the boys. Like, this is over in their minds, right? They're going to come. This problem is no longer a problem. We're going to deal with this, right? And so they can see that. They can tell the number of troops that are around them. They know that things are not good. And this is a guy nobody in their right mind expects to show them mercy, to cut them any slack at all. I mean, he's not going to back down. He came to finish a job. He's a military guy, and that's what he's going to do. And so they've got to be thinking to themselves, this verse that says we've got time to flee, how in the world is that going to happen? Like, you gave us a sign, but now we're stuck. What's the deal? I mean, he's not letting people out. Everybody's coming in, but nobody's going out. And so, like I said, that starting with Gallus, their revolt was a real black eye for the Romans, because they didn't, who are these people that they don't have an army, yet they were able to run us off? I mean, we own the world, and this is what happened. So again, not a good taste in the Romans' mouth for the Jews. And again, this idea of vengeance is pretty strong with them. It's looking pretty bleak. What do we do? And just as a side note, I looked because it says about the earthquakes. I was just curious to know if there were any recorded earthquakes during that time. And there isn't. There was one at about 107 AD, which is well beyond our time frame. And then the other one that was recorded was a pretty significant one. There's evidence for one. Again, this isn't 100% proven, but there's evidence that there was a 7 to an 8.2 on the Richter scale earthquake that happened in 33 AD, perhaps when the veil was torn in two. But that word earthquake just means, it's the word seismos, where we get our word seismology from. And it just means to shake. And so Josephus records that there was a massive thunderstorm in 68 AD that shook the whole world, is the way that he put it. And so maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's the earthquake that happened, but then again, maybe it just wasn't recorded, and it was just fine too. So let's go back to Vespasian for a minute. So he's here, and he is not happy. And it doesn't look like they're going to have time to flee. But what happens? Chaos breaks out in Rome. Nero dies. who was emperor at the time. And then these 4 guys, including Vespasian, start fighting over who's going to be the next emperor. And there's several, there's 2 guys that end up killing each other. And then this guy, Vitalis, says he's emperor, and Vespasian says, I'm not having that. And so he takes off for Rome to go figure out what's going on, kills Vitalis, and proclaims himself emperor. And so here's your window, 68 AD. They were surrounded, no way out. And yet God said, we'll fix that. He sends Vespasian back to Rome. And it's at this time that we know that the Christians that were there, that were paying attention, flee to the city of Pella. So they have this window, they have this opportunity to flee, just like it tells them in the verses. Just like God said, you're going to have opportunity to get out of here if you're paying attention. And so they do. But Rome's not done. They're still really unhappy with the Jews. And they haven't forgotten, even though Vespasian took off to go take over as emperor, he sends his son Titus back to finish the job. And he finishes the job. He comes in, and once they storm the walls and start cleaning up, it's said that he actually had plans for the temple. He wanted to use it, convert it into some, temple to Diana or something, I don't know, but he wanted to use it for Roman things as kind of this, I don't know what you call it, giving the Jews another black eye by taking their building and turning it into something that they never would have approved of. But somewhere along the line, one of the soldiers starts a fire in the temple, and they can't put it out. And the soldiers realize that there's all this gold lining the walls and on these stones that they've used. And so they stoke the fire, and they're literally scraping down to the bedrock to collect the gold that's collecting as this fire burns the temple. And so literally they just pushed every stone of that temple off the edge. Not a single stone was left upon another. Now, I didn't find where it really said how Titus felt about that. I'm sure he was disappointed because he did have plans for that building, and he instructed them, don't harm the temple. And it happened anyway. And so at this point, the center of Jewish worship's gone. Their ability to perform all of the rituals and commandments, the sacrifices, is gone. And so it's just amazing. And at some point, the genealogy, the records and things were lost, so they can't prove that they're of the tribe of Aaron to have the priesthood. All of that is just wiped out at this point. And that to me is pretty amazing, the way that plays out when you figure out this was written beforehand, and exactly what he said happened in pretty much, without naming names, he spelled it out exactly what was going to go on. And so another interesting point here is that this verse 24 or verse 28, it says wherever the corpse is gathered, or wherever the corpse is, there vultures will gather. That word there for vultures is really eagles in the Greek. But a lot of people feel like eagles aren't carrion eaters, and so they changed it to say vultures because vultures will eat the carrion, but that's not actually true. Eagles are opportunistic, they'll eat on whatever. But eagles would be a better translation, not only because of the word, but this is the Roman standard that they would have carried into battle. The eagle was their symbol of, their government. This would have been carried by who knows how many people on their way into battle. So, again, here's God prior writing something down that is fulfilled in real life. The eagles came to where the corpses are. And the things that happened, I don't know, again, how many of you have read the accounts that Josephus puts out, but the things that went on in the city, both by the Jews themselves in the last days, and then what the Romans did when they came in, are just unspeakable. And it's, to me, the exact picture of vultures or eagles landing on a corpse and picking it clean. I mean, it's, I don't want to get too far into it because it's pretty depressing. But I will read, this is a little excerpt from Josephus that kind of explains some of the things that were going on. It says, "There was no pity for age, no regard for rank. Little children and old men, laymen and priests alike, were butchered," wrote Josephus. He added, "The cries from the hill were answered from the crowded streets, and now many who were wasted with hunger and beyond speech found strength to moan and wail when they saw the sanctuary in flames." So that's directly in relation to the temple being on fire, but just that one little bit, I can't even imagine being there in those days. And so, where's my next slide? Oh, there we go. So in Matthew 24:29, it says, "But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." And so again, this verse 29 is kind of, it's difficult language. It's picturesque. It's not the way we normally speak or think. But it's really, this kind of wording is used in several other places. It's used to talk about what it really, to just kind of boil it down, it just basically means that it's a symbol that power is changing hands. And so it's used of Egypt in one place. It's used of, what's the other one?
John is made typical judgment language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Judgment
Yes.
coming.
Yeah, that's precisely. And so it's used several times throughout the scriptures, and it's not just used in terms of kingdoms necessarily. There's two people whose names just flew out of my head that I didn't put in my notes, that it uses that same language of them as well. And so it just means that, he's made a judgment, and Jerusalem, or the Jewish people, are no longer his chosen people. They can continue on as Christians and be joined back into that, but the old system is done away with at this point. He's transferred power into the Son. Any questions before we close? I think I only have a minute left here.
Verse 29 is almost copy paste from Isaiah 13:10, and there it's talking about Babylon.
Right, yeah, that's the other one, Babylon.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, you've already pointed it out. It's the same kind of thing. It's Babylon. Rome is the Babylon of this time.
Right, yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to stop talking now. Yeah, go ahead.
The only time the word sign is used in verse 30. What that does is it negates everything before that for all of these folks that think that all of the earthquakes and all those things are somehow a sign. They're not a sign. The only sign is the sign of the Son of Man will appear. And that's very important so that we don't get off, we don't get off on trying to look at all of the other stuff that's out
Right.
there. And by the way, this prophecy prophecy is only to the disciples. It is not to Israel.
Right.
We know that
Yes.
from verse
Yeah,
22
and I meant to
through.
point that out and didn't.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yep. So, thank you, everybody. That's class for this morning.